Ethan Carrington was the kind of billionaire who preferred silence over spectacle. He wasn't like the others, the ones who flaunted their wealth through diamond-encrusted watches or gold-plated sports cars. No, Ethan wore pressed shirts in muted tones, preferred old books to loud parties, and ran a tech empire from the 38th floor of a sleek glass tower in downtown San Francisco. He had built his fortune through intelligent algorithms and quiet discipline. And yet, for all his brilliance, there was something inside him that could not be coded doubt. For months, he'd been noticing things. Odd things. The marble hallway in his penthouse would smell faintly of lavender on days when he hadn't requested housekeeping. His favorite mug, an old ceramic thing from college, had been carefully glued after it cracked, but no one reported. The break. Sometimes, soft piano music would play in the living room while he was out, and when he returned, the playlist had been cleared. His maid, Anna, had been working for him for a year. Hired through an agency, she came every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, always on time, always quiet. She wore no perfume, rarely spoke unless spoken to, and carried an old, worn canvas bag that looked far too large for the supplies she used. She never made eye contact, never lingered. And that bothered Ethan, not because he needed conversation, but because her presence was too perfect, too silent, too scripted. One evening, after returning early from a board meeting, Ethan heard her voice. He had just stepped off the elevator when he paused in the hallway, the door to his penthouse slightly ajar. Inside, Anna was on the phone. He couldn't make out every word, but her tone was sharp, precise, not at all the shy, hesitant woman he thought he knew. She spoke fluent French, and not just casually. The kind of French you heard in legal conferences, in high-level negotiations. Ethan, who had learned French at university, was stunned. She switched next to Russian, then Arabic, flawlessly. He stepped back into the elevator without making a sound. That night, something shifted. ***, Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The image of Anna standing by the window, speaking 3 languages with effortless precision, haunted him like a riddle. Who was she? Why was someone that skilled someone? With the calm confidence of a diplomat cleaning bathrooms and folding bedsheets for minimum wage. He reviewed her file, but it offered almost nothing. Hired through a 30 service. No last name listed, and her address led to a PO box. It was as if she didn't exist outside of her job. That only deepened the mystery. By morning, his curiosity had turned into obsession. He called off his meetings for the day, dressed down in jeans and a hoodie, and told his driver he'd be taking a personal walk. But he had another plan. At exactly 5:04 p.m., Anna left his building. She carried the same canvas bag, wore her usual beige jacket, and walked with purpose. Ethan followed from a distance, keeping his head low beneath a baseball cap. She didn't take the bus. She didn't hail a taxi. Instead, Anna walked for over 30 minutes, through city blocks, down side alleys, and finally into a quiet neighborhood near the edge of Chinatown. There, she stopped in front of a small bookstore tucked between 2 shuttered shops. The sign above the door was faded, the Olive Branch Multilingual Literature and Translation Services. Ethan waited across the street, hidden in the shadows of a closed cafe. Anna unlocked the bookstore door like she owned the place. Inside, she flicked on the lights. Shelves lined the walls, books in Arabic, Mandarin, Farsi, Russian. A chalkboard in the window displayed workshop times and language, tutoring slots. That's when it hit him. She wasn't just a maid. She was running something intellectual, something real. But why keep it a secret? He watched for 2 hours. People came in quietly and left just as quickly. A woman dropped off papers. A young man handed Anna a folder and bowed before leaving. None of it felt like normal business. Something beneath the surface vibrated with intensity, like a code only a few people could understand. By the time Anna turned the lights off, and stepped back into the night. Ethan was sure of two things. She was living a double life, and he needed to know why. The next morning, Ethan stood by the windows of his penthouse, watching the city wake up, but his mind was far from business reports or stock indexes. It was with Anna, her secret bookstore, her fluency in languages that no one at the agency had ever mentioned, the calm way she moved in a world that didn't seem to know she existed. She arrived that day like clockwork, wearing the same modest smile, the same quiet voice. She vacuumed the rugs and dusted the shelves like nothing had changed. But for Ethan, everything had. He watched her from behind his laptop, pretending to type. There was a rhythm to the way she worked, a kind of grace in her stillness. But then she made one mistake. As she lifted a framed photo from his bookshelf, she paused. Her fingers brushed the edge with a slowness that didn't match her usual efficiency. Ethan noticed. That picture of him and his sister, Camille, from 20 years ago was private, personal. He didn't like people looking too closely at it. "You've been here almost a year," he said suddenly, his voice startling even himself. Anna froze, then turned. "Yes, sir." "Do you enjoy cleaning for strangers?" Her eyes flickered. "It's honest work." "But it's not what you're trained for, is it?" She went still. "I speak French," Ethan continued, standing slowly. "And I recognized every word you said the other night. Arabic, Russian. That's not something you learn by accident." Anna's expression didn't change, but her shoulders rose, subtly defensive. "I don't think this is part of my cleaning shift." He stepped closer. "Then off the record, tell me who you are." Silence, then a whisper. "My real name is Anara Halil." She took a deep breath. "I used to work as a translator for the United Nations. I lived in Syria for 5 years, Iraq for 2. I helped negotiate ceasefires, translated refugee testimonies, coordinated with intelligence units. But things went wrong. A negotiation I was involved in fell apart. Lives were lost. People blamed me. I blamed me." She looked up, eyes rimmed with a pain she'd been carrying alone. "I disappeared. I didn't want a desk. I didn't want praise. I wanted silence. I took a new name. I cleaned houses so I wouldn't have to think." Ethan's mouth was dry. He didn't know what to say. Not because he doubted her, but because he recognized her silence. He had lived in it too, after losing his sister to a plane crash he could never explain. "Why the bookstore?" he finally asked. She looked down. "Because language is still the only thing I trust. I teach immigrants how to speak for themselves, quietly, off the grid. It's not much, but it's something." Ethan nodded slowly. "It's everything," he said. The days after their conversation were different, not just in Ethan's mind, but in the way the air shifted whenever Anna entered a room. He still called her Anna, but now he knew the truth behind the mask. She wasn't a maid. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had once stood between warring governments and begged them to choose peace. She was someone who had once mattered deeply to the world, and now chose to matter in silence. Ethan began visiting the Olive Branch bookstore in secret, always after hours. Anna allowed him in, showed him the chalkboard schedule, the private lessons, the collection of rare dictionaries and donated grammar books stacked in crates. There were no security cameras, no credit card machines, just cash, kindness, and community. "I helped them learn to speak," Anna said softly one evening, as she swept the floor. "Because if they don't speak, no one will know they exist." It was then that Ethan noticed the notebook. Worn, leather-bound, its edges curled like paper petals. Inside were the names of people Anna had helped. Refugees, asylum seekers, undocumented. Families, some she had coached for immigration interviews. Some she had helped write letters to embassies. One woman had been reunited with her children after Anna translated her story and delivered it to a journalist in Spain. Ethan turned the pages in quiet awe. Why keep it hidden? Because if the world knew, they'd stop it, Aina said. Governments don't like quiet revolutions. That night, Ethan lay awake for hours. His fortune had built towers, but Aina's words had rebuilt lives. Her work, though invisible, echoed louder than most of the global summits he had ever sponsored. The next day, he did something bold. He called his legal team and asked them to draft papers for a foundation, the Halil Initiative, named after her real name, though he didn't tell her yet. Its mission: to support grassroots language programs and underground educators helping displaced people across the globe. Aina, of course, refused at first. "You can't buy your way into this," she told him. "I'm not," Ethan said. "I'm offering you a megaphone, one you deserve." Eventually she agreed, but only if she retained control. "Your name can be on the money," she said, "but the message stays mine." Ethan smiled. Deal. Months passed, and the Halil Initiative quietly took root. It didn't explode across the headlines, it wasn't meant to. Instead, it blossomed in the margins just like Aina had. Small learning centers popped up in immigrant-heavy neighborhoods. Community libraries received grants for multilingual resources. Volunteer interpreters were trained to help refugees during medical emergencies. And Aina, now officially executive director, worked with a grace that drew an admiration like a quiet flame draws warmth. Ethan watched her work from a respectful distance. He funded her vision, attended some of the events, but never tried to control it. In fact, he found himself learning more from Aina's humility than he had from years of boardroom strategy. She didn't crave recognition. She didn't want the spotlight. She only wanted voices like hers, forgotten, displaced, dismissed, to be heard. Then one day, during a winter conference in Geneva, Aina took the stage as a keynote speaker. She stood at the podium in a modest navy suit, no makeup, no fanfare. But when she spoke, the room fell silent. She told the story of a cleaner who once translated ceasefires in war zones, of a woman who'd scrubbed floors just to escape the sound of war, of how language had saved her again and again, not from violence, but from invisibility. And when she closed with, "When you silence someone, you don't just take their words, you erase their right to exist," the audience stood in thunderous applause. Some wept, some recorded. Many would never forget. Back in San Francisco, Ethan watched a live stream of the speech from his office, tears prickling the corners of his eyes. Not just because of what she said, but because of how much it meant to her to finally say it. Later that year, Aina returned to the bookstore not as a cleaner, not as a stranger, but as a woman who had reclaimed her narrative. Ethan sometimes stopped by on Sundays, just to sit among the books and listen to her teach. One afternoon, as the sun dipped through the dusty windows, Ethan turned to her and asked, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving that world behind?" She thought for a long moment, then said, "No, I didn't leave it, I rebuilt it. On my terms." Ethan nodded, smiling dot, and as Aina turned back to her students, half a dozen young women learning to say their names in a new language, he realized something deeper. She had never truly been the maid. She had always been the architect, an architect of hope, of courage, of voices rising where silence used to live.